We'll have to see though if Japan gets a 3-1 lead after winning this. That's going to be pretty tough for the U.S. to come back from. So if Shohei is able to lock that up, and he certainly has the accomplishments to do so.
And along with accomplishments, this team here, very, very somewhat standard team. They're opting in for the Fluttermane and the Heatran with that Tornadus and the Urshifu and Rillaboom, complemented with the Chien-Pao as well. Just a very standard six here. Something that I want to point out as well is that Tornadus on with the Sunny Day, boosting up the Heatran's damage there with the Heat Waves and giving the Fluttermane that photosynthesis ability.
Yeah, I really like Japan for so many years has had this wonderful strategy of just like Sunny Day plus Heatran plus speed control, and it always seems to work so well for them. And I think like having that option with a little bit of bulk, and then like the three really great attackers of Rillaboom, Urshifu, Fluttermane, all with like a stab boosting item, just seems like it gives Shohei so many options for offense, but also like a lot of the like bulk is still present on some of those offensive attackers. Like Heatran Rillaboom is such a good defensive combo as well.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the times, like these Pokemon are able to do damage because of the things like the grassy terrain for Rillaboom, the sun, as we mentioned, for the Heatran. There's a lot of modifiers that give the damage to your Pokemon. So you are able to run items like the Assault Vest on the Heatran. You don't necessarily need Life Orb. You're getting your damage modifiers from other places, and you're able to run Bulk, Assault Vest, and different items. And you have a lot more flexibility. And I really think that's where Japan shines in their team building is they're able to take these 6 common Pokemon, throw a few different items on there, and really build these masterwork spreads where they just complement the player so well.
I think that's just like a perfect description of like so much of the strength that we often see from Japan. And we also have Joe Ugarte, incredibly accomplished player, with like a totally different take on how Pokemon can be played. We have Grimmsnarl Volcarona, just like totally out there Pokemon picks that have so much strength to them.
Yeah, opting in for two setup options there, that being the Volcarona and the Ogerpon, notably a very clear physical and special attacker, both able to set up here. This is very different, I'd argue, from Joe's normal style of play. You know, I would expect Joe to be playing the Sun team, right, that we see Shohei playing, but instead of opting for that Grimmsnarl and the Ogerpon and the Volcarona, opting in for a little bit of a slower play here. The Swords Dance, as we've kind of seen on the Ogerpon earlier, does a lot of damage if it's got in the right position. I'm really curious to see which of these players is going to take the victory here.
Absolutely. Like Joe's team is so predicated on having like the right positions at the right time with the right defensive positioning. But Shohei Kimura just has such flexible and powerful offense that we'll really have to see how this plays out as we jump into the game. There's so many options from both sides.
Yeah, and something like that Lunar Blessing on the Cresselia, we kind of overlooked it as well. But we do see Iron Hands Grimmsnarl come out from Joe and Urshifu Tornadus from Shohei as we jump into our US versus Japan World Cup Top 16 Game 1.
So I think just right off the bat, like maximum flexible offense from Shohei and maximum defensive capabilities from Joe. I feel like there's just so many options here with like fake out and setting up screens. But then I mean, how much is Grimmsnarl really going to help against an Urshifu if it can just critical hit through everything? So I think that's the crucial question that we need to see Joe answer.
And very notably here on the Grimmsnarl as well, Grimmsnarl suffers, I think, from move slot syndrome, where you have so many different moves that Grimmsnarl wants to run, right? You want to run the screens. It has access to that parting shot now. So something like that, as I've seen before as well. Thunder Wave is, you know, a great disruptive move as well. But Spear Break is going to be able to damage Urshifu a little bit. But instead, we are going to see Tornadus actually switch out there for Heatran, maybe trying to not, you know, immediately drop to something like the Wild Charge from Iron Hands and a Thunder Wave into the Heatran.
Such an interesting choice to get the Thunder Wave off. It's not where I thought Joe's priorities would be, but it's really interesting to like set that up down the line. There's no longer the Tailwind plus Heatran mode because of the way that switch played out. Surging Strikes going off into the Iron Hands does about half, but depending on the targeting from this Iron Hand, if that's a Wild Charge into the Urshifu, which it is, that's taking that really low really quickly, but as you mentioned, there's a lot of potential to have just a little bit of bulk in weird places with Shohei's team, and Kimura absolutely taking advantage of that with surviving that Wild Charge.
Yeah, and living the Wild Charge there, now you are threatening a Surging Strikes, picking up a KO on the Iron Hands, or even into the Grimmsnarl if you feel like you want to do damage. Your Heatran is paralyzed. The thing about this now is that Grimmsnarl, even if it's not doing damage with its Spear Break or in general, it is threatening enough on the field, right? Spreading that paralysis that you kind of have to focus it down. Otherwise, your team's just going to get paralyzed. And, that's almost as bad as taking damage sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like Grimmsnarl is a really good matchup into sort of the Tailwind game plan Kimura is going for. Is that, like, if you're able to get Thunder Waves out and stall a little bit, then it no longer matters that Tailwind's up. You're, like, buying turns in a lot of other ways from, like, fully paralyzed or just not being able to use the Tailwind boosts. But
Exactly.
That's sort of down the road, and for now, we've got just a lot of offense from Kimura on this turn.
Yeah, and this Terra Fairy to keep up the pressure maybe, so you're not necessarily weak to those Drain Punches, then Iron Hands, and opting in for a Detect Fair on the Urshifu so that something like a Spirit Break doesn't go out. Instead, Grimmsnarl, I think, going for a Thunder Wave there and the Urshifu Detect from Joe's side. I'm really curious what this Iron Hand wants to do. It is that Drain Punch, that Terra Fairy already paying off, and I think this Heatran opted in to click Earth Power, so this might be able to pick up it went for a Heat Wave instead, so it's not going to pick up the KO on Iron Hands. Grimmsnarl hasn't gone for a screen yet, notably as well.
Really interesting play there. I like the way that Kimura pivoted out the Tornadus into the Heatran earlier, just to sort of have the ability to throw off Heat Waves now. I think that it gives a lot of options here for damage, although as we saw without the Earth Power, it's going to take a while to handle that Iron Hands. The one really nice thing is I think this Iron Hands is now in Aqua Jet range, and so we are going to be able to see that Iron Hands being taken out by the Urshifu without any worries about Thunder Wave, double target, or anything.
Yeah, and the Grimmsnarl is just going to opt for a screen there. I think what's really interesting as well is that Shohei led Torn and then switched it out for the Heatran. It was a great defensive switch, but it was also important to note that the two setup Pokemon on Joe's side of the field are weak to Bleak Wind Storm, that being the Ogerpon and the Volcarona. As we see the Ogerpon come in, I think Shohei realized that was a part of their game plan, that you need to preserve Tornadus so that you're able to fire off those Bleak Winds to start doing damage to Ogerpon and Volcarona. And if you kind of lose that Pokemon to Iron Hands early in the game, it could be super detrimental to your game plan.
The one big challenge here is that the Heatran was fully paralyzed on the turn where it could have gone for Flash Cannon into Grimmsnarl. And now I think if that screen was Light Screen from the Grimmsnarl, it's going to be really tough to get that Tornadus into a position where it can Bleak Wind Storm. The Grimmsnarl isn't down yet, so we can still Thunder Wave later. And the Light Screen's up, so the Bleak Winds aren't going to be doing as much damage. So Kimura's doing a great job to preserve the things he needs to preserve, but Joe's doing a really good job of making it hard to use those tools to get rid of his Pokemon.
Yeah, exactly. And again, this Grimmsnarl just sitting on the field, not going anywhere, getting off screens, getting off paralysis. We do see the Ivy Cudgel come out from Joe's Ogerpon, being faster than that Urshifu, getting that KO there.
Yeah, really important to confirm that Ogerpon is going to be faster. The Spirit Break goes out into that Tornadus. Maybe not what Joe wanted, because I think the Rocky Helmet damages him just as much as the Spirit Break does Tornadus. But that gives some options here. The Tornadus is in position now against the Pokemon it wants to be using Bleak Wind Storm against. And crucially, Joe has that setup potential, but he hasn't had time to do that yet. So this is sort of Kimura's opportunity to do as much damage as he can before that setup gets out of hand.
Yeah, and I think not only can it get out of hand, but Joe doesn't even necessarily have to set up here. Joe has so much in his favor right now. You have access to your terrestrialization still, right? Heatran is already terrestrialized here for Shohei, but Joe has access to that water terrestrialization. Not only are you getting rid of the weakness, but you have a +1 from that Wellspring Ogerpon ability. And you have things like Light Screen on Grimmsnarl, as well as Thunder Wave and the Spirit Break, lowering the special attack. There's just so many modifiers that are going in Joe's favor here that allow this Ogerpon to really thrive. And even though Shohei has switched in Flutter Mane here, it's not going to be able, again, with the Light Screen and with the special defense buff, there is going to be a lot of damage mitigated from Joe's end.
So one really interesting piece about this, Joe's done a spectacular job of stopping damage from coming out from Kimura, but Kimura has a lot of options to stop damage here. As we see this Ogerpon go for the terrestrialization, it does now effectively double damage with its water type attacks, but Kimura is about to have that. We saw him hovering over the Sunny Day button, and I think that's really one of the key aspects here, that with Sunny Day, it might be that the Tornadus and the Flutter Mane can survive an attack from this Ogerpon and have the chance to go for a couple of attacks to break it down instead of needing to do damage right away.
Exactly, but we are going to see a Thunder Wave here into the Flutter Mane again, just spreading that paralysis, trying to be annoying as possible. That should allow the Ogerpon to outspeed this Flutter Mane. We do see the Ivy Cudgel come out in the sun. This doesn't pick up Tornadus, I don't think, especially with the Sun Boost. Yeah, no, that doesn't. Tornadus is able to live another turn.
Yeah, not even close on the Tornadus. But oh, is that a fully paralyzed Flutter Mane? It is. Oh, wow. That's pretty huge. I think Fluttermane really wants to get rid of that Grimmsnarl before it's able to spread paralysis for too long, but one of the many reasons why paralysis is so strong is that chance, and I feel like Joe's just giving himself so many opportunities for that to go in his favor.
It's so funny because I think Joe almost preferred if Fluttermane moved that turn, so the Dazzling Gleam picks up the KO and Grimmsnarl, and you are able to pivot in something like the Iron Hands to threaten Fake Out on Shohei's Tornadus, and they aren't able to get up a Tailwind for free, but we do see Shohei get up that Tailwind, and Ogerpon going down, Ivy Cudgel getting the KO on Tornadus finally.
Yeah, now that the Tornadus is gone, it does feel a little bit like there's some writing on the wall here. There's a +1 special defense Ogerpon, and 2 paralyzed special attackers against Light Screen plus the special defense boost on the Ogerpon. You've got Sun, so it can't knock you out right away, but things are definitely looking a little bit tough. As we see, Volcarona was actually the bring from Joe, even with the Heatran. A really interesting choice there.
Yeah, so this is where the Heatran, right, the Terra Fairy is kind of not... It's kind of paying off. It's kind of not, right? You're not weak to the Ogerpon either. You have the Sun boost that you were able to set up with your Tornadus. So the damaging moves that you have from Heatran now are the Heat Wave, but you have to get through Paralysis first. That's the big thing as well, is that even though Tailwind is up for Shohei, you kind of talked about it before, where your speed is still halved from the Thunder Wave, and that Moonblast did no damage in this world. He's just going to heal it back and then some.
Oh, the Sisyphean nightmare of Ogerpon. It just cannot go down with the Horn Leech. And Volcarona, I think, it's going for the Quiver Dances, but pretty soon there's going to be a setup where Joe can just go for Giga Drain plus Horn Leech plus Giga Drain, and it's just Shohei doesn't have enough damage to be able to make it through this game, especially with that full paralysis.
Yeah, and that full paralysis on the Heatran is huge as well, because at least if you don't get full paralysis, you can start trying to chip down this Volcarona. But Joe has done an excellent job of using the Grimmsnarl and kind of mitigating any damage that Shohei really wanted to throw towards the setup options here on Joe's side of the field. And bringing both of them is insane to me, having both the Volcarona with Quiver Dance and the Ogerpon, even if it didn't go for Swords Dance, the threat of it is still there. And having the Volcarona, again, go for those Quiver Dances, and as you pointed out, go for Giga Drains eventually. Because the Heatran is now Terra Fairy, you are able to go for Giga Drains very safely into it, and this Fiery Dance is going to fire off and hit Volcarona, and in the Sun, +1 is going to guarantee that KO.
Now it's +2. Oh, things are not looking good for Kimura. What a wonderful demonstration of Joe's whole team premise here. We see the double setup Pokemon with healing. We saw Grimmsnarl set up screens, go for the Thunder Waves, even the Spirit Break to reduce the potential for damage from that Tornadus. Like, I think Kimura has a very good overview of what it is that he has to beat with some adjustments. But it's also a really big uphill battle here. That was such an impressive battle from Ugarte's side of the field.
Yeah, I think Joe just has a lot of tools, right? That's the thing, again, about we've talked about this all day with these World Cup matches, is that you can look at the meta very clearly and you're able to play around your opponent. So Joe, knowing how Shohei maybe likes how to play or how they like to build their teams, and kind of capitalizing on that with the setup here. All these Pokemon doing amazingly into Shohei's team, and Volcarona in particular, right? If you're able to get rid of this Tornadus, you're able to set up these Quiver Dances and beat down Pokemon like the Terra Fairy Heatran. And if they do set up Sun, right, they're punished a lot of the time because you're boosting the Volcarona's moves as well.
And let's go and step into game 2 and see what they came up with.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see an Iron Hands Lando lead from Joe here, and Rillaboom and Fluttermane from Shohei.
I think the Rillaboom is a really interesting adjustment. It just like gives another way to get some damage into that Grimmsnarl, but Ugarte is still one step ahead, and Joe bringing the Landorus is really interesting. Just like really challenging the Qianpao and Rillaboom that Shohei wasn't able to use in the last game, and might be trying to pivot into to handle like the special defense boost Pokerpon. I feel like it's just a really good adjustment for Joe to stay one step ahead to target like physical attacks instead of special attacks, knowing that's the adjustment Kimura might go for.
Exactly, and I think it's so important as well. I think like Joe was able to correctly realize that Shohei is good enough of a player to adjust for the Grimmsnarl lead, so something like Fluttermane Rillaboom to go for a Fake Out and a Moonblast in a Grimmsnarl to maybe get rid of it, right? If you realize Thunder Wave is the problem, you're going to try to play for that, right? And having that bias and calling that out from Joe's end by leading Landorus, I think is, again, a demonstration of their skill as well. Joe really showing that they understand how the game works as well. It's a two-player game here. But Shohei is going to switch out that Rillaboom for that Tornadus. Maybe if Joe opts here for something like the Terra Flying on Landorus, which we could expect here, as we see play out here, this could just be a Terra Blast into that Rillaboom slot, and Shohei switching in that Tornadus to take that a lot better than a Rillaboom would.
Yeah, I think it's really important for Joe to be able to establish that he has immediate offense and not just the bulky mode for this game, because it makes it that much harder to adjust. It looks like that's into the Flutter Mane, but it's not a KO. That's pretty crucial to know that the Flutter Mane's able to still get an attack off through that.
Yeah, absolutely. But we do see Joe maybe realizing that and doubling that slot to guarantee the KO on that Flutter Mane, knowing that the Rillaboom could protect. That's obviously a scary thing. This Flutter Mane, doubling it up. I mean, the Flutter Mane can also protect as well, but knowing that how Shohei is kind of playing and doubling that slot and getting that correct is really big for Joe. And, Dazzling Gleam did do a decent chunk to the Landorus and the Iron Hands, but I'm not sure if it's enough necessarily to get you ahead. The Urshifu is a little scary for Joe if it does come in here with something like Tailwind, now that there's no fake out from the Iron Hands, but I'm really curious to what Shohei is going to do.
Yeah, I think there is the one opportunity here with the positioning of just, there's an Urshifu Tornadus option here, and you can always take that. It's a lot of damage into the other side of the field, but it is tough. I'm not sure if I saw correctly. I think that there was a lot of thinking on Kimura's side. I'm not sure if that was maybe a timeout where he was trying to go for the Protect and went for Gleam instead. I think just really speaking to the number of options Joe has, that Kimura really has to think about all of his options. But even with the Flutter Mane going down, that definitely gives some options here to, I think a Pokemon can almost, the Landorus can definitely go down and the Iron Hands can get pretty close. Might even be a KO. So it feels like he still has some options.
Exactly, and if Joe's anything like Abdullah from last game, right, if he's able to get this call, and if there is something like that Ogerpon Wellspring in the back, and it comes in for the right slot, this Surging Strikes could be going in straight into the Ogerpon. But we do see that Shohei does get the slot correctly, and I believe actually targeted that Iron Hands with that Terra Water Surging Strikes.
Yeah, so that's going to be spectacular to be able to have Joe reading specifically on a Surging Strikes play and have that read be incorrect. That's really what Kimura needed to get back into this game. And if this Terra Water Surging Strikes is enough for the Iron Hands, and it definitely will be after, or probably will be after the Bleak Wind Storm. This is, what a read, not going for the Tailwind and just playing straight into knowing that the Landorus would switch. That's a hard call out from Kimura, and it might really be paying off here.
Yeah, and not only is Tailwind it's kind of a call in the sense, but you don't have to click Tailwind there, right? The Ogerpon is most likely coming in for a slot. And the Landorus, if you does go for a Terra Blast, you have enough HP on your Tornadus, right? And if you do go for the Terra Water, if that is your game plan, you should be able to eat the Terra Blast from Landorus. So waiting a turn to click Tailwind, right, just so you have an extra turn later in the game, I think was really smart from Shohei to guarantee that you have just an extra turn of Tailwind that, could add up in the late game with things like the Volcarona having that Quiver Dance and this Scarf Landorus that is now staring the field.
Thank you. That's such a wonderful call out. There are times where players make such wonderful plays that it looks like a hard read, but you're right. The risk reward was just absolutely in Kimura's favor. That Flutter Mane going down into the Urshifu being present on the field into this play, that Terra was both valuable offensively and valuable defensively. The call of the targeting Surging Strikes especially makes this amazing, but yeah, that really works regardless. And timing the Tailwind is just such a mark of when players are playing Urshifu Tornadus really well versus just clicking buttons.
Exactly, and it's so interesting. I think a lot of the times players maybe are frustrated with Tailwind because it seems like, it's just click Tailwind and then a bunch of damaging buttons, but a lot of the times I think Tailwind mirrors are some of the highest level gameplay that you can really watch in Pokemon, as we see the Urshifu detect there. And this is just another amazing play from Shohei, protecting that Urshifu so that you are able to get a Tailwind with Tornadus, and now you're all able to fire off another Bleak Wind Storm, and there's no Terra Water or screens this time to protect the Ogerpon from this super effective Bleak Wind Storm.
Just a masterclass in ways that you can play these two Pokemon. I think Protect plus Tailwind used to be a very standard play prior to the new speed dynamics. Now there's that temptation to always be attacking while you're Tailwind, to use every turn of it. But here it's just perfect, seeing Tornadus be able to be an attacker on this turn to finish off the Ogerpon without needing to worry about Urshifu needing to be getting that Tailwind boost because it's already there. So that's a double KO with 2 turns of Tailwind left still for the last Pokemon.
Yeah, and Shohei's Pokemon both very healthy with Tailwind freshly up. Depending on what Joe's Pokemon last is, the Volcarona definitely is not going to be able to fight its way back. Facing down a super effective Bleak Windstorm and Surging Strikes here with no Terrestrialization option. Of course, there is the Flame Body option for Joe here to burn the Urshifu, and you could dodge Bleak Windstorms as well, but we are just going to see a forfeit from Joe there, and we're going to jump into game 3. And we haven't seen any crazy reads yet per se, but that's something you could take advantage of if you are at this high level of play as we jump into our game 3 here. As we see Joe opt for that Grimmsnarl Iron Hands lead again, and Shohei switching it up again with Urshifu and Fluttermane.
Yeah, so interesting to see Kimura still using the Fluttermane lead. Like, it didn't seem to work very well last time, but it is spectacular right now. It's immune to Fake Out. It has the pressure into Grimmsnarl, like you were mentioning. But then not leading the Iron Hands is also really interesting. Like, I feel like these players must have so much up their sleeve with the specific leads that they've chosen. But it's tough to see without seeing how the turn plays out. Like, the who has Fake Out just totally flipped, and I wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this Fluttermane, for example, right, being immune to that Fake Out is super interesting. In terms of, you are threatened with Heavy Slam, but because you have Fairy Feather on this Fluttermane instead of something like a Specs, you have the option to protect, so Joe has to consider that. But instead, seeing a Thunder Wave go off into that Urshifu, and a Dazzling Gleam from this Fluttermane, not picking up the KO on that Grimmsnarl, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, if this is just a Heavy Slam into the Fluttermane, picking up the one-hit KO for Joe.
So Fluttermane down again, but it might have gotten enough damage off if this Urshifu is able to attack and not be fully paralyzed. Oh. Well, there's definitely still some options from Kimura's side, but that's tough because that was going to be either finishing off the Grimmsnarl or near a KO on that Iron Hands, and it feels like Kimura really needed that. Like, the trade was lose Fluttermane in order to get damage on the Pokemon you need to get damage on, and now he's just a little bit behind on damage, so we'll have to see. You can see him taking a while to think about what the right next play is given the paralysis.
Yeah, because I think Shohei's game plan was, even if you Urshifu, right, takes damage or whatever, like from a Wild Charge, we know it lives, but being able to get that Surging Strikes off into either the Iron Hands or even the Grimmsnarl, right, you're in range now where you're able to Surging Strikes next turn or go for an Aqua Jet in combination with this Rillaboom with a Glide, and you're able to just do so much damage. But look at that HP on the Iron Hands. It's so healthy. And you're going to need to do so much damage to it, especially now that this Grimmsnarl could either set up a Reflect or, go for more Thunder Waves into the Rillaboom. Again, there's just so many options Joe has with this Grimmsnarl lead that Shohei has to account for.
Yeah, there really are. I think the possibility that the Grimmsnarl can get up another paralysis too, and then I don't think there is a way to one-shot the Iron Hands. You have to double target it with both Pokemon to get rid of it. Like, it just feels like he has so many options here, and once that Urshifu is down, that Grimmsnarl could try to set up a screen later down the line to be able to protect Iron Hands even more.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, too, is while Shohei is kind of navigating their way around this game and trying to figure out their way around these paralyses, which we haven't seen a dodge yet. Instead, the Rillaboom is going to get paralyzed here, and Rillaboom coming out, Urshifu coming out, doing Surging Strikes to the Iron Hands. Not going to be able to pick up the KO, I don't think. It might be very close.
Oh, that is incredibly close.
Just barely.
So there's a really interesting moment here, though, where I think both of these Pokemon are in KO range from the priority moves on Kimura's side of the field. I really like the adjustment to just, use the Fake Out to and accept paralysis on Rillaboom to try to, reset to that situation that Kimura had been planning around of getting the Surging Strikes off. I think that's a really calm and level-headed way of dealing with the fact that there's a little bit of luck in the game. But now it is a little bit tough. Both Pokemon are paralyzed. That means Grimmsnarl has the faster priority moves and can set up a Reflect on the Light Screen. Or it could just go for a Spirit Break. And it's hard for Kimura to cover all of the Grimmsnarl options, given that he's moving second now. So he's in a bit of a tough spot.
And not only are covering the options a very valid point as well, but I think Joe's fine with Grimmsnarl going down. I think the thing about Grimmsnarl is that you're able to get these screens, you're able to go for the Thunder Waves and just be an annoying Pokemon on the field. But as soon as it, gets KO'd, Joe's allowed a free switch into something like that Ugarte or that Volcarona that we saw game 1. And we saw it kind of dominate those games as well. And Shohei doesn't have Tailwind at the moment. And with the paralysis, that speed is going to matter when a Volcarona and an Ugarte is staring you down. The Grimmsnarl is going to be able to live another turn, though, as Volcarona comes in here.
Yeah, that's tough. I'm not sure if it's better or worse for Kimura if the Grimmsnarl goes down and then both attackers hit the field, but it's definitely tough to be even on Pokemon at this situation. Like, especially with just the Tornadus in the back, when sure it can Tailwind, but everything else is paralyzed, and so it can't really make its partners go any more quickly. And then also with bringing the Rillaboom, there's that cost of the Grassy Terrain being on the field, so I think this Urshifu is almost forced to switch out because that Giga Drain is just really strong from the Volcarona.
And not only is the Giga Drain strong, but it can go for those Quiver Dances. This Volcarona is actually Terra Dragon, so it is going to be resistant to those Surging Strikes, as well as the Wood Hammer that Rillaboom would be throwing off into it. Not that it, it needs to resist it anyways, but it's just an additional. And Terra Dragon just looks cool in the Volcarona. It gets like an extra set of wings there, as
Yeah.
we see it terrestrialize. Grimmsnarl deciding to go for its second screen. Both screens are going to be up. That Reflect and the Light screen finally online. And a Quiver Dance from this Volcarona just starting to secure Joe's board position here.
Yeah, how many attacks will it take to get rid of Volcarona? I'm thinking like 8 at this point. Things are not looking great. As the Wood Hammer does, okay, a quarter of damage, but that's about the strongest move that Kimura has into that slot at this point.
Yeah, and you're now fighting Paralysis on Rillaboom, Recoil, and soon your train's going to be gone too with how long this game is going to take. This Grimmsnarl is also, because it's able to live that turn and the Wood Hammer didn't go off into that slot, which I think I would have liked to see from Shohei. The Thunder Wave now is threatened on the Tornadus, right? So even if you do get up Tailwind, it's going to be all for nothing because eventually those turns are going to wear out and the Thunder Waves are going to stick around. And that status effect is just going to, as we've seen before, just be annoying and threaten that paralysis on Shohei's Pokemon.
Yeah, I think at this point, with the Flutter Mane down so early, Joe's just really been doing a great job of playing to the option of this Dragon-type sweeper at the end with the Volcarona. It's not quite what I was expecting, but it gives him this wonderful win condition given the way that the game played out. As now, yeah, everything on Kimura's side of the field is paralyzed, and nothing on Kimura's side of the field can do damage to a Dragon-type.
Precisely, and getting rid of, and that Grassy Glide doesn't even get rid of the Grimmsnarl. Fiery Dance firing off into the Tornadus, not picking up the KO. Tornadus now has to fight Paralyzation. It makes it through. Grimmsnarl avoids that Bleakwind Storm, and Volcarona does get hit. No speed drop or anything either.
I mean, there's still a lot of Pokemon on Kimura's side of the field, but it seems all but wrapped up for Joe. Just like, I can't imagine how you get enough damage into that Volcarona, except maybe with like a lot of critical hits and maybe no, like I really can't imagine how you're able to make it through that Pokemon. Just a beautifully played game from Joe to get to this point. It's going to be a while before the game concludes, but it feels like it's almost locked up at this point.
Yeah, I think Shohei is kind of debating on if they want to click Tailwind or if they want to continue to get damage and hope for Bleakwind Storm drops, because that's kind of what you need. Is you want the best, you want both things, right? You want damage on this Volcarona, you want to start chipping it down so that your Urshifu can maybe beat it with critical hits, but at the same time you also want speed control, so you might opt for something like Tailwind, and both those options I think are very valid plays for Shohei, who's already on the back foot. Instead, we are going to see the Tornadus get paralyzed and not be able to do either.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the win condition, was you go for a Tailwind, and then you go for a Bleakwind Storm, and you get the speed drop, and then the Urshifu is faster. But it was just like a pretty thin set of margins that Kimura had to work with. And even with like the survival that he would have needed from the Tornadus and the read that he would have needed to get the Urshifu in safely, the paralysis just gives this extra layer of protection for Joe. Like, I was saying the games are all locked up. I'm not like a top tier player who's playing at this level, and I think there's always just thin ways that players can get out of any situation. And I think that Thunder Wave gives just this nice way to kind of cover for those a little bit more, as we saw right now.
Yeah, exactly. This Grimmsnarl getting so much value out of this game. It has not been KO'd. We even see Shohei hovering over the forfeit button there, kind of like debating. Seeing the paralysis on all of your Pokemon is definitely not something you want to see. Joe preserving that Grimmsnarl, opting to maybe save it for screens later in the game. This Ogerpon coming in. Urshifu going to get paralyzed, not going to be able to lock anything in. This Volcarona, and the Tornadus as well is going to get paralyzed. The Volcarona is going to Giga Drain and pick up the KO on the Tornado or the Urshifu.
this is just such an interesting consequence of like just specifically this game that we're playing of Pokemon. Like I think there was a world where maybe if Kimura is able to attack with both Pokemon and get the Tailwind and the Detect, and then go for Bleak Wind Storm and then get the speed drop and then attack the Volcarona, like maybe there was a world where he could have somehow gotten through this game. But there's just so much that has to go right in terms of predictions, in terms of the random number generator, that Joe's just found this like nice way to get not a guaranteed win condition that's still very close to. And I really like seeing that.
Yeah, and this Volcarona getting, again, a lot of the Pokemon on Joe's team just got so much mileage. We see Fiery Dance. Shohei doesn't even opt for the fake out, just knowing they need to do damage. It is going to be a one-hit KO into that Rillaboom. And it's looking like curtains here for Shohei as Ogerpon fires down the Iva Cudgel, and Joseph Ugarte is going to take the 2-1 win against Shohei Kimura.
Wow, that was a spectacular game. I don't think I've ever seen Pokemon played in exactly this way before, but it was really interesting to see. Like, I felt like every single game in this best of 3 was profoundly different. Like, both players were very fluid and playing almost totally different games each time, and yet it was still very clear that they were all very high-level ways of playing the game. And it felt like up until the last turn, like both players were still playing to like however small the odds were, whatever their win condition was. And that was really cool to see.